There is no doubt that the telephoto lenses are just as attractive for landscape photography as the wide angles. In this video I'll give you 7 steps to make powerful photos with a 70-200mm telephoto lens. Now I realize that many of you landscape photographers out there own a 70-200mm lens or similar already, and most of the photos I show in this video will be within that focal range. However, all these steps work just as great for other types of telephoto lenses, such as a 70-300mm, 100-400mm, their crop sensor equivalents, and even prime telephoto lenses. Many of the steps also work for wide angle and standard lenses. Also, as words like powerful and impactful are relative terms and kind of overlap, they'll be used interchangeably in this presentation. So with that out of the way, let's get started. The first step is to figure out what to photograph and where to get some inspiration for what you want to photograph. It is about finding a subject which can be more or less anything. A mountain, some sea stacks, a special natural phenomenon or event, or something more conceptual like showing the size of nature relative to humans. This is something I'm actually very inspired by these days. I wonder if that is some more or less unconscious response to the growing human impact on planet Earth, or maybe to seek out the comfort of insignificance in the grandeur of nature. Who knows? To achieve a powerful feeling in a photo, there is definitely something to be said about photographing something we humans already interpret as powerful. A big waterfall, a glacier, a mountain, a huge tree or castle, or use photographic techniques to emphasize the power or impact of a given scene. More on that later. There is also the question about finding inspiration for what to photograph. There are different approaches used by different photographers. Sometimes the pursuit of the unknown and going to a new location and see what happens is preferable, while other times you have a clear vision based on research, and that's what gets you out of the door. There is no right or wrong approach, and it seems most landscape photographers use a combination of both. I personally get a lot of inspiration from Instagram, Facebook groups dedicated to landscape photography, movies, and tourist brochures. If you want to know how I explore and prepare, be sure to check out my video on that topic. There is a link in the upper right corner. The second step is to approach the scene with holistic thinking. Holistic thinking basically means that the whole photo is greater than the sum of its parts. Just like individual puzzle pieces are useless, but combined they form something which is greater than the sum of the individual pieces. In this location in the Faroe Islands, I combine the background waterfall with foreground myself as the tiny human. In itself, the waterfall is cool, but nothing special compared to many other waterfalls, and there is definitely nothing interesting about me. However, by combining the waterfall and me in a single frame, the two insignificant elements suddenly become much more impactful and powerful. In Iceland you can find these sea stacks called Reynisdrangar. The photo basically only contains 2 elements, the sea stacks and the waves. Waves can in themselves be beautiful, and the sea stacks are also rather powerful in themselves. However, by combining them you get a really powerful photo where the whole is greater than the sum of the individual pieces. And in this photo from Denmark, the combination of the striking red field of poppies, the background blue water from the fjord, and this historical subject of the dolmen combines into a powerful photo. Add to that the tiny bird sitting on top of the dolmen. There is no doubt that the weather conditions play a significant role for landscape photographers, so photographing your scene during optimal conditions is critical. What optimal conditions are is of course relative to your scene and vision. However, relying too much on specific conditions can also be a problem. If you have the flexibility to benefit from and create photos which are aligned with your vision without depending on specific conditions, you can react and use the conditions you are given. You definitely have an advantage when it comes to creative output. In this example from the Faroe Islands, I knew that with strong winds either during a lot of rain or just after, we could capture this fascinating phenomenon where the waterfall would be blown back up the mountains. The waterfall also looks great during other conditions, however by coming prepared we managed to capture it in the short window where the wind was in the right direction. The same goes for fog. Over the past year I've wanted to capture these trees during foggy conditions, and when my apps agreed it would be foggy, I simply just went out and got the photos. Sometimes the weather is just out of your hands and you'll have to deal with what you are given. In this example from Iceland, this location was part of a workshop schedule, and with the right light you can get some fantastic photos of the glacier. However, on this day it was just overcast and kinda bland weather. Luckily we went anyway, and when we arrived it turned out the overcast skies were great for some soft ambient light which didn't distract from the elements of the scene. On top of that, because it hadn't snowed, it was possible to capture a great reflection in the ice in front of the glacier. You can come prepared, you can seek out favorable conditions, but in the end there is a huge factor of luck, and sometimes you may end up with something even better than what you imagined to begin with. So, on the one hand use the weather conditions to your advantage, but on the other hand avoid relying too much on specific weather conditions, if possible. If you so far enjoyed this video, I'd highly appreciate a like. It is free and really the easiest way to support my channel. Once you are on location, it is time to find your composition. I cover and share many composition tips on this channel, so I'll just share a few of the most important to emphasize power. Following from holistic thinking, the first composition tip is to simplify your scene and only include in it what you find necessary. Luckily, telephoto lenses are great for this, and you can really zoom into what it is you want to photograph and leave out all the rest. In this scene I have these two beautiful trees. If you shoot too wide you will include a small forest next to the trees, and in this photo I had to zoom way in to only capture the many layers of the trees without including the foreground and a nearby lake. It can sound counterintuitive that you'll have to simplify your scene to make it more powerful or impactful, but it really is all about filling the frame with what you need to tell the story and nothing more. Just as in this example where I originally went for this crop but ended up preferring this crop instead. So remember when I told you about emphasizing the power and impact of a scene with photographic techniques in step 1? This is it. Adding depth to your photo can really enhance a sense of 3D, which is highly beneficial to improve the power and impact of your photo. Play around with foregrounds and layers. In this photo from the Faroes, it makes a big difference to the scene to include a foreground. The layered background looked cool in itself. However, by changing the position from where you photograph, as to be able to include the foreground and a person, you add another layer and more depth, which makes the photo pop much more. This scene from California isn't powerful in itself as the huge vistas I show from the Faroe Islands. A phone snap from this location at 24mm will give you a pretty photo of a tree tunnel, however nothing really impactful. However, by changing your perspective by moving back and using the telephoto lens, you can accomplish a sense of compression where you keep the sense of depth from the tunnel effect yet make it much more powerful. If you want to know even more about perspective compression, be sure to check out my other telephoto lens videos where I describe it much more detailed. In these examples I have added a human to the scene, and that is another compositional tool in your tool belt to create a powerful photo. Add a sense of scale. The easiest way to do this is using something the viewer can relate to and know the size of. A human, a car or a house are great examples of elements you can add to your scene to show the size of nature. The rule of thumb I follow is to get a good distance between the camera and the person I use in the foreground. Relative to the scene you're photographing, that distance doesn't have to be super big. Here are a couple of examples where the distance is a little too big and the person almost disappears in the photo. I share many more compositional tools in my two ebooks, Landscape Composition 1 and 2. Both ebooks are designed to be easy to read and understand, and they have tons of examples. They both have 10 handy chapters, and the final is a chapter that bring all the topics I covered in the ebook together. There are links to the ebooks and their free light versions down in the description of the video. When you have your composition figured out, you just need to dial in the right settings. There are a few factors to be aware of when you photograph with a 70 to 200mm lens or any other telephoto lens. The depth of your photo, the amount of available light, and whether it is windy or not. If you have a good depth in your photos, as I had in the tree tunnel photo, you generally want to photograph at a closed down aperture like f11 or f16. As you can see, I actually photographed this scene at f2.8. I do not remember my thought process on location, but if I were to do the same scene today, I'd definitely aim to get the entire photo in focus. Sometimes even a closed down aperture is not enough to get the entire scene in focus, and you will have to start focus stacking. If you do not have a deep depth in your photo, like in the twin tree example or even in this example from the Faroe Islands, you can easily photograph at a low aperture like f2.8 if your lens allows for it. I would, however, in that case suggest to just photographing at the aperture where your lens is the most sharp. This differs from lens to lens and camera system to camera system. Check out my video on sharpness if you want to know more about this. You also need to take the amount of available light and wind into consideration. Given you use a tripod and there is no wind, you photograph with a low ISO and close down aperture to optimize sharpness and details. You will only lengthen your shutter speed, which doesn't affect the sharpness of your photo. However, if there is wind, you will need to take your shutter speed into consideration. The stronger the wind, the faster a shutter speed you will need, which means you'll have to start compromising your ISO or aperture. If I personally can avoid lowering the aperture to a point where I need to focus stack, I do not mind increasing my ISO a bit. If you use a full frame camera, which has been released within the past 5 years or so, the noise penalty for increasing your ISO is usually not too bad. The vast majority of people can't see the difference. You'll have to print really big for the noise to appear, and with modern noise reduction software you can remove grain and sharpen the photo with just a few clicks anyway. What you cannot do, at least not yet, is making a blurry photo due to camera shake sharp. It is not a secret that I usually consider my editing process to make up half the result of the finished photo. I won't share an entire editing session here, but the most important editing I can share for emphasizing power and impact is to add contrast. Here I do not mean to just crank the contrast and clarity sliders to 100. There is so much more to it, but editing for impact, it is usually a good idea to have a black point and a white point in your photo. A black point is where a part of your photo is 100% black, and likewise is a white point where a point in your photo is 100% white. This ensures you are using the full dynamic range without blowing out large portions of your photos. Now, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to treat each photo individually, and if this tip makes it look weird, try with less contrast. An example of where I benefited great from a lot of contrast was in this photo. As you can see, the straight out of camera photo was rather bland, but after the editing it really pops and comes alive. The same goes for this photo of these beautiful gnarly oak trees. Here I mainly used the dehaze slider to remove the fog, but I stuck with the philosophy of having a black and white point. Be sure to check out the video I released a few weeks back. I share both how I photographed the trees and the full editing of the photo. The editing phase is really where you control your creative vision. Whether to go high contrast, go black and white, or edit with a purpose of realism is really up to you or a potential client. I of course share many more editing techniques and start to finish processes in my huge 28+ videos editing course, Photoshop for Landscape Photographers. Here I teach you how I edit my photos. I teach you how to use the editing software and the different techniques I use to make my photos pop and stand out, while at the same time keep that personal touch so that I feel connected to my art. The point is, I give you a ton of tools that you can use to edit either like I do or find your own path and preferences in post-processing. There is a link in the description of this video to enroll in the course and a coupon code to save some money. And on that note, a huge thank you to all of you who've already enrolled. I am super happy to hear all your positivity about the course. It means the world to me, so thank you. The final step in the process is to get some feedback on your photos. I do either of two things. I share the photo with my trusted photographer friends who I ask to pull it apart. This always makes a massive difference to my photos, as they always spot something I didn't do due to my own bias towards it. If you can collect a small group of photographers you trust to give constructive feedback, this comes highly recommended. And I am sorry to all of you asking for feedback on Instagram. I've decided not to give feedback simply because so many people are asking for it. If I obliged your wishes, it would be the only thing I would have time to do all day. Personally, I prefer to take pictures and make YouTube videos. Feedback is also something you can ask for in the dedicated Facebook group you can become a member of if you enroll in my course. What you can also do is compare the photo you are editing with one photo you have already finished. In this way you can compare tones, saturation levels and so on, and this makes sure that the style or theme for a certain collection of photos stays intact, and if you really want to speed up your workflow you can make your own presets for a certain look. These were the 7 steps I used to make powerful landscape photos with a 70-200mm telephoto lens. Be sure to check out the link to the ebooks and course in the description of the video. And as always, I'd highly appreciate both a like and a comment to tell the YouTube algorithm that this video is worth showing to others.